were barely out of my mouth before they came out of President Biden's mouth. A former president that is a convicted felon is now seeking the office of the presidency, Biden said at a fundraiser 10 minutes from my high school. He added that after the 2020 election, something snapped in this guy for real. It's literally driving him crazy. Call crazy Donald Trump a convicted felon. Mission accomplished. Call convicted felon Donald Trump literally crazy. Mission accomplished. Now do it on camera. I want sound bites. Because now there is more evidence it's working. And it cannot be said too often, and it cannot be said by too many different Democratic leaders, and it needs to be said by the President of the United States loudly and confidently and repeatedly. He's convicted felon Donald Trump, and, oh, by the way, he is literally insane. I am not betting democracy on one poll, on any poll, and particularly this one. It's conducted by a Canadian firm called Leger. Much of the sampling was before the guilty verdicts. Even if Leger is right on the money, it's not conclusive, but it is an indicator, another big neon red letters flashing kind of indicator to keep calling him convicted felon. Leger's poll says 1 out of 3 Republicans wishes they were nominating somebody else. Among Republicans under the age of 35, it's nearly half wishing they were nominating somebody else. The actual numbers are outliers. The point is not, like the 34 convictions of Trump shattered at least part of the baseline assumption in his cult that all but a handful of Americans, those evil demo socia fascia commucrats, all but them, they all support God Trump. The fact that he is a convicted felon hits Trump cultists viscerally. It may, in fact, be the closest they ever come in their entire lives to an honest understanding that they are in thrall to a criminal. It costs them sleep. It makes them angry. It makes them uncertain. Now, there is other polling suggesting that Trump's apologists are far more fired up about these convictions than are the Democrats and the independents, that their fantasies of now machine gunning all of us may be as stupid as they sound, but their desire to symbolically machine gun all of us is being reflected in the pressure they are putting on the House and their state attorneys general to do something, anything, to strike back. And ultimately, that boils down to more donations, more soft voters going to the polls, after all, more oomph, and more of a need for Democrats to pressure their electeds to hammer home the fundamental point here. So once again, I cannot say this too often. Biden cannot say this too often. Because even the concept of Trump as convicted felon Donald Trump is only a component of a bigger issue. The president has sat down with Newsweek. Why? Who knows? Who in the White House still thinks Newsweek is some sort of access route to undecided voters, or to anybody for that matter? But he sat down with 2 of their writers and they published the transcript, and in it the president comes as close as he ever has to an admission that the whole mindset of his incoming administration was wrong. Maybe even naive, and that a lot of that mindset remains in place, and that it is as much an obstacle to him defeating Trump again and saving democracy again as Trump himself is an obstacle. Biden recounted for Newsweek his first G7 meeting. Quote, I said, well, America's back. Macron, of France, by the way, looked at me and he said, for how long? For how long? And then Schultz, and Olaf Scholz of Germany, said to me, what would you say, Mr. President, if tomorrow you pick up the London Times and found out that thousands of people stormed the British Parliament, broke down the doors, killed 2 bobbies to implement the swearing in of a prime minister, choice of prime minister? And it made me realize just how fundamentally what he allowed to happen sitting in this room looking at that television for 3 hours and didn't do a damn thing, said about America and how much confidence people lost in America. There's not I'm going to say, be careful what I say. There's not a major international meeting I attended that before it's over, and I've attended many, many more than most presidents have in 3.5 years, that a world leader doesn't pull me aside as I'm leaving and say, he can't win. You can't let him win. My democracy and their democracy is at stake. Exactly. You're goddamned exactly right. Say that. Say it again. Say it at rallies. Say it in speeches. Say it in TikToks. Say it in campaign commercials. Say it in TV interviews. Say it in photo ops. And when you say it, when you say the world needs America to save its own democracy and thus to save all the other democracies, say that the first step to doing that is to defeat convicted felon Donald Trump. Two further convictions. All right, a step back in Georgia, but a step forward in Wisconsin now, in which the fake electors prosecution has just grazed Senator Ron Johnson and may yet nail him. Felony charges of forgery against Kenny the Cheese, the Trump attorney Ken Chesebro, and attorney and ex-judge Jim Troupis, and the Trump muscle man Michael Roman, who started the landslide against Fani Willis in Georgia. This is the fake electors scheme as it played out in Wisconsin. They did not indict Trump. They did not name him as an unindicted co-conspirator. On the other hand, the Wisconsin Attorney General Josh Kaul told a news conference yesterday that the investigation is ongoing and he may seek further indictments. The key here is that while this has not been specified in those charges, just says forgery, but the charging documents indicate that Chesebro, Troupis, and Roman were attempting to get the fake electors documents, the forgeries, to Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson on January 6th. Johnson, you will recall, initially admitted somebody tried to get him something, but having the intelligence of a hairbrush, he was too stupid to realize that the trying part there was illegal, and he was one of the illegals. And then somebody told him, so he denied everything. As it is, again, optics, visceral reactions, the first court appearance in Wisconsin will be September 19th. And if further reporting on this begins to dirty up Trump and Johnson, it can only help in a vital swing state. Unlikely to have a trial before the election. You may not need one. Just get it in the headlines. And also on the subject of the law, I will report this, and only this, from the Hunter Biden trial in Delaware on charges of possessing the name Biden. You may recall that the little Peter Navarro errand boy scumbag Garrett Ziegler was one of the linchpins in the laptop scam. Garrett Ziegler showed up to the courtroom in Wilmington yesterday, and Hunter Biden's wife, Melissa Cohen Biden, later explaining that Ziegler has called her, quote, the most horrific Jewish slurs, went up to Ziegler and said, quote, you have no right to be here, you Nazi piece of shit. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to nominate Melissa Cohen Biden for whatever office she's willing to run for. Speaking of the Garrett Zieglers and the Ron Johnsons and the Kenny the Cheeses, why have they done it? Why have they sold out this nation for convicted felon Donald Trump? At least we may have an answer. It may be the answer. If you're like me, that has been the drumbeat behind all of these crises. Whatever the latest crisis is, whatever the motives specific to that crisis might be, that's the drumbeat in the background. Why? Why do they sell their souls for an idiot like Trump? Why do they sell out their country to lie to take the fall for an idiot like Trump? Why do they whore themselves out and do so for a guy who started as a moron and has since worked his way down to near total mental incapacitation? Why? Why do they buy his excuses and then sell his excuses and ultimately provide his excuses? Why were they willing to try to steal an election for him, and when that didn't work, to try to foment a revolution for him, and when that didn't work, to simply put their own asses in jail to try to interrupt the peaceful transfer of power? Why? And behind that, why for this guy? For this guy? A guy Hitler would have been embarrassed by? A guy Stalin wouldn't have given 2 minutes to? And finally, we have an answer. Why? Cash. The Pulitzer Prize-winning journalism nonprofit ProPublica is now reporting that for at least 8 of Trump's witnesses in the criminal cases against him and the daughter of one of those 8, the look is bad. Real bad. Can't yet prove cause and effect in court. Can't yet prove the witness tampering side of this. Can't yet prove Trump ordered anything here or even knew about these. Let's use the word emoluments. That he even knew anything about these emoluments. But these 9 people have, to quote the ProPublica seminal report, received significant financial benefits, including large raises from his campaign, severance packages, new jobs, and a grant of shares and cash from Trump's media company, unquote. From reading the report, and I encourage you to read it, and reading the reaction to it, the story not only obviously hit the nerve in Trump world, but it's also obviously the string to pull on. Because in advance of publication, one of Trump's infinite number of lawyers, all of whom suck, warned that if ProPublica, quote, continue their reckless campaign of defamation, Trump will evaluate all legal remedies. Ooh, that'll stop them. All of Trump's legal remedies? The ones that have so far all turned out to be snake oil? Ooh. Here's the 9 and what they got, either connected to what they did for him or just an incredible coincidence of timing. Boris Epshteyn, the timeline ProPublica reports, 2022, Georgia case grand jury. He testifies favorably about Trump. April 2023, interviews with the special counsel. August 2023, Trump's campaign goes from paying Epstein an average of $26,000 a month to a new high of $53,500 a month last October. Susie Wiles, Trump campaign manager, daughter of, "Hi, I'm Pat Summerall." She's on the tape when he's showing off the top secret military maps. Remember that? Warns her she should not get too close to the maps like they had cooties or something. From ProPublica, May 2023, she gets a 20% raise. June 8th, news of the tape comes out. Same month, her political consulting firm got a record high payment from the Trump campaign, $75,000. And then later, the Trump campaign hired somebody and made her the 4th highest paid staffer on the campaign, $222,000 a year. Her name? Caroline Wiles. Well, that's a coincidence. It's not a coincidence? What do you mean it's not a coincidence? Oh, she's Susie Wiles' daughter. Margot Martin, also an alleged witness to Trump showing people how big his classified document cache really was. The ProPublica report, making $155,000 a year and then called to testify to the grand jury, and then suddenly making $185,000 a year. Dan Scavino, Trump's anti-social media guy. ProPublica's timeline for Dan Scavino. Congressional investigators call him in August 2021. He stalls. Later, they give him a subpoena. He keeps stalling. Half a dozen extensions later, there's a subpoena to go talk to the criminal grand jury. After that, Dan Scavino is given a seat on the board of Trump's Truth Social. Stalls again till May 2023, and according to SEC filings, then he gets a $4 million executive promissory note paid in shares, and a $600,000 retention bonus. Yeah, I wonder what he was retaining. Jennifer Little, a Trump lawyer, called to the grand jury to talk about when she was there and they wanted the documents back. And Trump said, shouldn't they just not play ball? And wouldn't it be better if we just told them we don't have anything here? Little, according to ABC News, testifies and says she didn't remember him saying anything about not playing ball. Before she testified, per ProPublica, she'd never been paid higher than $125,000 in 1 month. March of 2023, $218,000. Since she testified, at least $1.3 million in total. Evan Corcoran, the other Trump lawyer at the Don't Play Ball meeting, he testifies in March 2023. ProPublica reports just days later, his firm gets, quote, 2 payments to his firm totaling $786,000. The firm brought in a total of $1.4 million in that 4-week span, more than double its payments from any other comparable period. Steve Witkoff, expert witness for Trump, defending Trump's real estate valuations in the Trump Organization real estate fraud trial last year. From ProPublica, quote, 2 months after Witkoff's testimony, Trump's campaign for the first time started paying his company for air travel, $370,000. Alan Weisselberg. Oh, you know who Alan Weisselberg is and where he is right now. 4 months after the New York Attorney General sued Trump for financial fraud in his real estate business, ProPublica reports, Weisselberg got a $2 million severance agreement with a non-disparagement clause and language keeping him from voluntarily cooperating with investigators. Wow. Just an incredible coincidence. Well, actually, nine incredible coincidences. And they kind of dovetail into this other story about the Epoch Times. Did you see this? A pretend news organization that spent more money promoting Trump on Facebook than any other group that says, yeah, there'll be a rapture, and in the rapture, all non-Trump supporters will die. One of whose reporters breached White House security and handed Trump a still unexplained envelope in 2018. The Epoch Times that funded Larry Elder's race for president this year up to $5 million, and Elder got approximately, how many primary votes? Approximately none. Okay. The chief financial officer of the Epoch Times has now been indicted and charged with participation in an international money laundering scheme worth at least $67 million. All you need is cash. Just a coincidence. Oh, and one other incredible coincidence. You didn't see any of this from ProPublica in newspapers this week because the new editorial level at most of our newspapers, A, they are British. If the president would like to issue an order on immigration, they should stop British newspaper men from showing up in this country. You think we would have learned that with Murdoch? The new editorial level of all the newspapers think it's not worth it to run the news if their paper can't take credit for that news. Or it's not worth it if taking credit for the news could get them in trouble with somebody. You know, like how the Washington Post broke and then hid the Alito flag scandal. And as always, where possible, a little comic relief. Speaking of newspapers screwing themselves into the ground, the New York Times printed a focus group about the campaign, evidently under the mistaken belief that this is 1988, and we all want to know what the focus groups are thinking. Worse yet, it was a focus group moderated by Frank Luntz. The Times evidently under the mistaken belief that it has not been alleged that Frank's hair is not his own. Anyway, I'm just going to read these excerpts, which I'll remind you were commissioned by and printed in the New York Times. And I just hope somebody did this in hopes of slipping it past an editor so that the rest of us would conclude that, you know, we're doomed. If we don't get out and vote, raise money, convict Trump, if we don't do that, democracy is dead. And that if we want to start worrying about 2028, We better start giving all voters a 10-question sanity test before letting them vote. Ahem. Quoting. Moderator Frank Luntz. Ben, you're up. Can you explain why? Undecided? Ben, 42, Texas, white, college advisor. A couple of people have mentioned a massive judicial conspiracy of everybody going after him. Okay, let's talk conspiracy math here. The sheer number of people who would have to be working together to get something like this working just boggles the mind. And have you ever tried to get 4 people to agree on what to order for pizza? I just don't see this working out. And at the end of the day, okay, fine. Okay, I'm going to side with Jonathan on this one, saying, what's the big deal about bribing Stormy Daniels? But I want a president who's going to be able to cover up a $130,000 bribe to Daniels. If he can't pull that off, I'm not going to trust him with the nuclear football. This seems like such an easy thing for him to screw up. I'm kind of leaning towards Biden now. Ben continued, we're all regular people with regular jobs. If any of us all did like 1,000th of what this guy did for being on trial, the financial stuff, the forms, the bribes, the meeting with people, we all would have been fired. We all would have been out on our butts applying for jobs at grocery stores or driving Uber or whatnot. You're saying it's all like a political theater and farce and whatnot? But he was having an affair with a porn star, and not a particularly attractive one at that. There are so many wonderful porn stars out there. End quote. Ben advises college students. We are doomed. Last note. Hey, Frank Luntz, did you ask Ben his opinion of the phrase convicted felon Donald Trump, who did not get away with covering up his scandal with a not-so-wonderful porn star out there? Too wordy. Not enough pictures for Ben. Also of interest here, sure, Major League Baseball just banned a 24-year-old utility infielder for life for betting on baseball games involving his own team. But of course, that has nothing to do with the main advertising on all baseball broadcasts now being for betting on baseball games. But more importantly, anybody notice that baseball also suspended for a year for gambling on baseball games? A guy who pitched in 3 of the 5 World Series games last year? Anybody worried about that by any chance? That's next. This is Countdown.
This is Countdown with Keith Olbermann.
Still ahead of us on this all-new edition of Countdown. Well, hell, I just mentioned Frank Luntz before the break. Why not take this opportunity to tell you all of my Frank Luntz stories? From the story in which he inadvertently got me the job anchoring Countdown on MSNBC, to the story where he inadvertently got the president of CNN fired. In things I promised not to tell coming up, but first, as ever, there are still more new idiots to talk about, the daily roundup of the miscreants, morons, and Dunning-Kruger effect specimens who constitute today's worst persons in the world. The runner-up worst, the Republican National Committee, Lara, idiot daughter-in-law, Trump proprietor. The Boston Globe reported yesterday, realized is probably a better term, that for days, for weeks, for months, the website for the RNC's Republican convention in Milwaukee next month, you know, the thing that's on convicted felon Donald Trump's schedule right after the sentencing. That website has used a beautiful background image depicting the skyline of Milwaukee, where they're going to have the convention, Milwaukee. Except Globe reporter Sam Brody noted, hey, that don't look a thing like Milwaukee. And he did a little Googling, and boy, was he right. The backdrop photo of Milwaukee being used by the Republican Party was actually a photo of Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam. Ho Chi Minh City. Now, if you post a photo of Milwaukee and somebody screws up, and it's actually not Milwaukee, but it's Minneapolis or Miami or something else that fits alphabetically near Milwaukee, okay, I get it. You didn't get enough sleep. You screwed up. You typed in the MI and you got Miami instead of Milwaukee. But you Googled Milwaukee and your computer memory corrected it to Minh, as in Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam. And so you get a variety of great photos of the place they no longer call Saigon. What exactly have you been Googling, Lara Trump, and why? They've changed it now. It is really Milwaukee. My God, how great would it be if all the Republicans left next month for Ho Chi Minh City? The runners-up, my old employers. I know, like that gives you anything resembling a clue about what network I'm talking about. Well, I mean ESPN. Look, I understand that the boys are really, really invested in this Pat McAfee, the challenged guy they have on the air every day now. He's the latest thing that they think will prove that no, the network isn't going to have to accept smaller audiences and older demographics for everything except live games forever and ever and ever to come. Even though that's the reality, lower the profit expectations, boys. But honestly, anybody else who ever worked there, if they had called the brand new savior of one of the few growth sports there is, the WNBA, if they had called her, quote, one white bitch for the Indiana team who is a superstar, unquote, that person would have been at minimum suspended or fired or suspended then fired. Trust me. Talk about ESPN suspensions. I know what I'm talking about. Especially with this guy Pat McAfee's record of platforming that psycho Aaron Rodgers and attacking executives. I don't know, how long has he been there? A year? He's got a longer rap sheet at ESPN than I did in 3 different tenures. But now, McAfee went on, and he said that calling the Indiana Fever rookie Caitlin Clark the B word, well, he meant that as a compliment about how she and nobody else has invigorated the league. But the use of the word was a massive F-up by him, he said. He meant it as a compliment, which is, look, a lie. There's no other word for it. You can't drop the B word into a discussion about the WNBA and mean it complimentarily. But management said, okay. Now he's made it worse. McAfee says he sent a personal apology to Caitlin Clark via her team's media department, and he heard back, quoting him, "It was all good. I meant it as a compliment. Those are my intentions. Caitlin Clark did not feel disrespected, but a lot of people said I was disrespecting her." So McAfee has now used the B word on the air as part of his coverage of women's basketball on a network that carries women's basketball, that was the original home of national coverage of women's college national basketball. Then he has insisted it was a compliment. Then he apologized to the player for it, even though he insisted it was a compliment. Now he's insisting the player is not offended by it. So who knows how this Pat McAfee will change the story today, or what he will do next time to embarrass ESPN and the people who hired him there, one of whom will eventually get fired for hiring him, fired by the other 2 people who hired him. I got a track record knowing about this stuff, too, over there. But our winner's the worst Major League Baseball commissioner, Rob Manfred. We all, except him, I guess, saw this coming once baseball embraced legalized gambling. It's new advertising when there ain't much new advertising. And again, there isn't a corporation in the world, particularly in sports, that's willing to say, hey, maybe the growth period is over for now. But for those of us who really didn't see this coming when baseball embraced legalized gambling, maybe that story of Shohei Ohtani and his interpreter and the interpreter's $250 million worth of bets on other sports that his interpreter got Ohtani to partially pay for, maybe that made the rest of us see it coming, except Rob Manfred. Baseball has now banned 24-year-old Venezuelan infielder-outfielder Tucupita Marcano of the Padres for life because he placed just a few bets with a legal sports book. A legal sports book. Legal bets on baseball. And baseball rules are you can bet on the other sports, but you can't ever bet on baseball. But just a few, only 231 of them in October 2022 and then the back half of last year. More than $150,000 in bets in totals. And the reason he was banned for life, 25 of the bets were on the Pittsburgh Pirates, and at that time, he was also on the Pittsburgh Pirates. Automatic lifetime ban. But baseball also suspended yesterday 3 other players for 1 year each for betting on games legally not involving their own teams. And I swear I am way more disturbed by one of those stories than I am about Marcano. Last year in the postseason, on 11 different occasions, the Arizona Diamondbacks called in a rookie lefty relief pitcher out of Indiana University named Andrew Saalfrank. And the commentators were extolling him, and he registered holds in 4 of his first 8 postseason appearances, and he'd only come to the majors a month earlier, and he got a hold in the game that sent Arizona to the World Series, and then he pitched in 3 straight games out of the 5 games they played in the World Series, and he didn't give up a run. He only gave up 1 hit, and he's banned for a year now. Because in 2021 and 2022, when he was still in the minor leagues, he bet once on a college ball game, and he made 4 bets on his big league team's games. His baseball bets totaled $445.87. I'm not making excuses for him. No betting on baseball. $445.87, $445 million.87, doesn't matter. But why did he bet on these games? Until this guy Marcano got banned for life yesterday, there had not been an active player banned for wagering or even just talking about wagering on his own team since Jimmy O'Connell of the New York Giants in 1924. Why has there been a sudden explosion of betting by baseball players on sports, on baseball? Why did this poor idiot Saalfrank just lose a year because he legally bet $445.87? Do you think it might have something to do with the fact that on every other commercial, on every sports telecast, and every baseball telecast tells you, bet on this game right now. Here's how you will win. You will win. You will win. Marcano's done for life. Saalfrank, he should be okay in a year. But next time, when it isn't a utility infielder, or it isn't a guy who bet $445.87 while he was in the minors, when it's a star, or it's an umpire, or it's a World Series umpire, what do they do then? Major League Baseball Commissioner Rob, I said bet on games, not baseball games. Manfred, today's worst person in the world at odds of 6-5. Take the over. All right, since I brought up Frank Luntz and his focus group for the New York Times at the end of the A block today, it's probably a good day to assemble my best Frank Luntz stories in one place, because Frank's gift, and he's like one step removed from practicing alchemy without a license. Frank's gift actually turned out to be accidentally essential in putting me on a new show called Countdown on MSNBC 21 years ago, and everything that followed at MSNBC, and yeah, you're welcome. Things I Promised Not to Tell, our number 1 story on the Countdown, and all my Frank Luntz stories. Let's flash back to that article by the writer Tim Alberta in The Atlantic that ended the Chris Licht presidency at CNN in early June 2023, although the damage will continue to shrink that network. And one of the moments that, had the piece been a video, would have gone viral was the scene in which Tim Alberta, the writer, is in the apartment of a USC professor who has convinced Chris Licht, head of CNN, to talk to 16 students. What follows is both maudlin and terrifying. To quote the piece, Chris was absolutely, positively, without question, the right choice for CNN, the teacher told his students, motioning them toward the man seated in front of them. There is nothing more important in America today than trust. I'm praying that Chris is successful. I want him to have this job for 10 years. Because anything less than 10 years will not give him the opportunity to make the most important changes to the most important news source on the face of the earth. I have every faith that he will succeed and every fear for this country if he doesn't. He turned to face licked. The teacher's eyes were watery. His voice was choked with emotion. My hopes and dreams are embodied in you, he said. This was quite an introduction, especially considering the man who gave it. Frank Luntz. Unquote. Frank Luntz? Frank Luntz? Frank Luntz? Could there be somebody else out there named Frank Luntz besides that Frank Luntz? The rabid, biased, subjective Republican pollster who can make a focus group defend any conservative idea and then get up and sing "Who Let the Dogs Out"? The mercenary who has worked for every news organization? The man who every 18 to 24 months goes through a phase or an act in which he pretends to not be a conservative, but just a middle-of-the-road surveyor of the American landscape and a professor at USC? Close USC immediately! That was Chris Licht's mentor? The great flaming fraud that is Frank Luntz? The whore that is Chris Licht? Well, that's the missing piece, I guess, in the Chris Licht story, adored by, beholden to, one of the great confidence tricksters of American media and American politics. And let me tell you how I know that. Frank Luntz once did his whore act on my behalf, or at least ultimately for my benefit. In 2003, I had gone back to work for NBC Sports for a second time. I was going to do the Olympics for them from Greece the next year. And as a peace gesture towards my still angry ex-employers at MSNBC, the head of NBC Sports, Dick Ebersol, said, look, they're having problems over there filling their shifts. They've got a couple of sick anchors, and the guys are too stretched with the war coming up. Why don't you go over there and fill in for the poor guy who's sick? While I was there, February 2003, absolutely no belief that I would stay at MSNBC for more than a week, they told me about a new show they were going to launch called Countdown. And Phil Griffin, who had produced my original MSNBC show in 1997 and 1998, who was my first producer in television at CNN in 1981, who was now pretty much running primetime at MSNBC in 2003, he told me they were deep in negotiations to buy from ABC News the contract of their ideal host for this new show, Countdown, Sam Donaldson. I blanched, apparently. I was, at the time, working at ABC News in radio, and although I loved Sam Donaldson's work, especially when he was the White House correspondent, I knew firsthand that ABC was so desperate to get Sam Donaldson to quit that they had taken him completely off TV, and they had stuck him on ABC Radio. And when that had not worked, they had just relegated his radio show to internet only. This is 2003. Internet-only radio? I knew this because I had filled in for him on his internet-only radio show where we took calls for 2 hours. Or I should say, where we took call for 2 hours. One person called in. The producer said that was about half the normal total. Now it was Phil Griffin who had told me this story. He blanched. The job offer is on Sam Donaldson's desk and on my boss's. He looked around the room. Would you do the show? Would you ever do another nightly show for us? Would you do this countdown thing? I shrugged. I guess, sure. I mean, so far it hasn't been as bad as it was 5 years ago. But, you know, they're going to have me go to the Olympics and do other sports stuff. I'll need the time off for the Olympics. You'll have to have a guest host. It's not till next year, right? It's like, yeah, not till next year. Oh, God, thanks. Okay. All right, well, I know how to make this happen. Rainey, get me Frank Luntz. I only heard Phil Griffin's end of the Frank Luntz conversation. He told Frank Luntz, and again, I could not swear that it was Frank Luntz on the other end, but why would he make it up? You'd say you're calling, I don't know, Uma Thurman, just to pick a name out of a hat. Rainey, get me Uma Thurman. He told Frank Luntz of the crisis. He invoked the name of the then president of NBC News, Neil Shapiro. You know Neil loves focus groups, Frank. Get me a focus group that says it hates Sam Donaldson, that we should never hire Sam Donaldson. Get me another focus group that says it loves Keith Olbermann. Can you do it by day after tomorrow? Great, Frank. Neil Shapiro's office called my agent to offer me the job as the host of Countdown, with the word with Sam Donaldson crossed out and with Keith Olbermann written in crayon. 3 days later. Frank Luntz has lingered in American politics like a rash that won't quite go away. Remember the time Trump inadvertently revealed that when he says he believes in God, if he isn't just making that up, what he believes in basically is a God who works for Trump as a vice president. Vice president of, I don't know, vice president of creation, something. When they asked Trump about his faith at the Family Leadership Summit in Ames, Iowa in July 2015, the moderator of the Family Leadership Summit in Ames, Iowa was Frank Luntz. He's ubiquitous. Trump said, people are so shocked when they find out I am Protestant, I am Presbyterian, and I go to church, and I love God, and I love my church. Frank Luntz then followed up with a softball of literally biblical proportions. He asked whether Trump had ever asked God for forgiveness for his own actions. I'm not sure I have, Trump answered. I just go on and try to do a better job from there. I don't think so. I think if I do something wrong, I think I just try and make it right. I don't bring God into that picture. I don't. Trump then explained to Frank Luntz that Holy Communion would suffice in such a situation. When I drink my little wine, which is about the only wine I drink, and I have my little cracker, I guess that is a form of asking for forgiveness, and I do that as often as possible because I feel cleansed. Cleansed. I think he's mistaken the holy wafers for colon cleanse. I think in terms of let's go on and let's make it right. The art of the deal indeed. Frank Luntz was there. Polls and focus groups and research, they are the balloon animals of politics. And Frank Luntz, he's just the balloon animal guy who has seniority in the park right about now. I've done all the damage I can do here. Thank you for listening. Please send this edition of Countdown to somebody who doesn't listen. Don't send it to Frank Luntz. Countdown musical directors Brian Ray and John Philip Chanel arranged, produced, and performed most of our music. Mr. Ray on guitars, bass, and drums. Mr. Chanel on orchestration and keyboards. It was produced by TKO Brothers. Other music, including some of the Beethoven compositions, arranged and performed by the group No Horns Allowed. Sports music is the Olbermann theme from ESPN2. It was written by Mitch Warren Davis, courtesy of ESPN Inc. Our satirical and pithy musical comments are by Nancy Faust, the best baseball stadium organist ever. Our announcer today was my friend Howard Feynman. Everything else was pretty much my fault. So that's Countdown for this, the 155th day until the 2024 presidential election. The 1,246th day since convicted felon Donald Trump's first attempted coup against the democratically elected government of the United States. Let's do what we can now to stop him from doing it again while we still can. The next scheduled countdown is tomorrow. Bulletins as the news warrants. Till next time, I'm Keith Olbermann. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, and good luck.